Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. After a disastrous Monza Grand Prix from the perspective of McLaren and especially Lando Norris, it seems Andrea Stella and the team have finally decided to declare Lando as effectively their number one driver and allow Oscar to support from now to the end of the season. That is based on statements made after the Grand Prix by Stella, based on criticism by even the likes of Toto Wolff and other team principals, that's what McLaren should have been doing for quite some time now. Max Verstappen is definitely concerned about these championships, but arguably this might be too late. At the end of the season, Lando could lose this championship by just a few points, and arguably McLaren will be the ones to blame. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. First of all, as we saw yesterday, of course, Kevin Magnussen, after terrorising the field again, secured himself a 10 place penalty, 10-second penalty during the race, and another couple of points on his licence. So we got to 12, and he's going to get a race ban. I think Pierre Gasly actually thought that Magnussen didn't deserve penalty points for the contact that he had with him, and is saying, oh, maybe he should be kind of relieved getting this. But let's be honest, right? I think given Magnussen's performance so far this season, it is justified, this race ban that he's getting. Obviously, the theory would be that Ollie Bearman will get the drive instead. He's going to drive for Haas next year, so of course that makes sense. And that would need, therefore, clearance from Ferrari. Worth noting as well, Ollie Bearman last year in Formula 2 had an unbelievable weekend in Baku. I'm pretty sure he got pole, won the sprint, and won the feature race, which is incredibly rare. So that seems to be a good circuit for Bearman. The possibility that he gets to drive that F1 car there, I think, is actually really exciting. It's not confirmed yet because he's a Ferrari Academy driver, so, you know, Ayuko Komatsu can't just say, oh, we're going to put him in the car. They've got to ask Ferrari for permission, but more than likely it just makes way too much sense, obviously, for them not to do that when Baku comes around. Also on Audi, we're not sure who their next driver is going to be alongside Hülkenberg. We've talked about Bottas. I'd like it to be Bottas, but I'd also like it to be a Bortoletto or even a Ter Pourchaire. You know, another rookie on the grid would equally be exciting. There's a few candidates. Apparently Pourchaire's being considered as well. The reality is, if they're considering Bortoletto, which I think probably they should, Formula 2 driver, won the race in Monza in crazy circumstances this weekend in Formula 2, but Pourchaire won the championship last year and has been a Sauber Academy driver. So you've got to at least consider him, if you not. That apparently is what is going on right now. But let's talk about Monza because, I mean, what a weekend it was in so many ways, so many storylines. And, like, this is incredible for Ferrari, but equally rubbing salt in the wounds of McLaren, the fact that Charles Leclerc won the Grand Prix for Ferrari at Monza, starting fourth, and didn't really have the fastest car. I mean, in many ways, he had a very solid car, obviously. You're not going to win a Grand Prix without it. But arguably, the McLaren was the best car, was the fastest car on the day, and in a similar way to in Silverstone, when, you know, it was pretty obvious that after the Grand Prix at least, McLaren did have the fastest car, but Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes won the Grand Prix that weekend. So of course this says quite a lot about Ferrari and Charles Leclerc, but also it says a fair bit about McLaren and arguably Lando Norris too. Just did want to point this out though, because you guys might remember when Max Verstappen had that stint on the medium tyres at the Mexican Grand Prix in 2022, when they just didn't degrade for the whole race, and Hamilton was on the radio to Bono being like, are his tyres going off? And they were like, not that we can see, unfortunately. But Charles Leclerc did the same thing, arguably better, you could say, in the final stint of this race. He pitted, of course, on lap 15 into 16 for the hard tyres, and after doing a 124, a 123.8, a 124, from lap 20 until lap 53, Charles Leclerc did a 123 every single lap. 123.8, 8, 7, 8, 6, 5, 3, 5, 2, 2, 3, 9, 2, 2. I mean, unbelievable consistency here from Charles Leclerc. Clearly he was getting a lap time from Ferrari, and they were like, hey, we think this is the target time if you want to get to the end on these tyres. He delivered the target time lap after lap for 33 laps, and he got the win. So, you know, that's good strategy from Ferrari. Can you believe it? But equally, it takes quite some driver to pull something like that off. But let's talk about Red Bull, right? Because what a situation they're in. And Max, understandably, is probably more pessimistic after this weekend than he's ever been. But you can argue, does he have that much to worry about? At least in terms of this year's championship. He does, but not to the extent that he should. I mean, you could well argue that if a Lewis Hamilton, if a Charles Leclerc was in that McLaren instead of Lando Norris, maybe we'd have a different championship. But equally, if we had some other team other than McLaren with the car that McLaren have, equally, Verstappen would have a lot to be concerned about. But the combination of Lando not executing as he needs to, and the combination of McLaren not executing as they need to, is creating an environment where Max Verstappen is obviously going to be concerned, but he's probably still going to win this championship. That's my current feeling. That may change, but Red Bull aren't going to stay this bad forever. Like, surely at some point over the next few rounds, they put something together that makes them more competitive. And Max is out here saying, I mean, he said after this weekend, we're not going to win any more races this year based on what we currently have. And that's okay if he's P2, P3, and Lando isn't winning all the time. But obviously it's not okay if he's P6, P7, as was the case this weekend. Now, Marco says, from the Red Bull side, that they do have upgrades on the way, and they expect to be competitive again in Austin. I will say, Marco's comments, I'm not so sure how trustworthy it really is right now. He always says what he thinks and what he understands, but I'm not sure Red Bull, and even therefore Marco, truly understands, because this weekend, Marco was saying after practice that, yeah, they'd found something. They'd made a step in terms of consistency and the car was better and all these other things. And then qualifying happened. They were all right in qualifying until Q3 when they couldn't switch the tyres on. But it was still like, well, Max was only maybe a tenth off the pole pace when he was maybe a tenth, 2/10 off the pole pace when the tyres were working properly, which for some reason they didn't in the final part of qualifying. But then in the race trim, the car was also half a second slower than the Ferrari, the McLaren. So that was confusing, and Red Bull and Max and Checo are saying that it's not just one problem, it's a multitude of problems that are contributing to this. And where have these problems come from? I mean, they didn't seem to be there at the start of the season. We saw the numbers yesterday that, you know, the Red Bull was 0.8 a lap faster than the entire field in China, and it was 0.7, 0.6 a lap slower than the fastest car in Monza, right? Like, that's just so unprecedented that there's got to be more of an explanation than what we are currently hearing. That's my opinion. You guys may disagree. But look, Marco says that Max knows what the weaknesses are. The problem is that it's not just a weakness, right? And, you know, it's not just like there's a big problem that they've got to solve and then it'll be fine. The belief is that there's a number of problems with their car right now. And as Max says, unfortunately, I don't have a degree in engineering or aerodynamics, but I think in terms of the feedback, like, I've said all that I can. It's clear to everyone now what we have to do. We have to turn the car upside down, which is a remarkable thing for a driver to say who is likely to be winning this world championship in this car, because it seemed to be a very different car at the start of the season, right? And it's just remarkable to think about how the fact that Adrian Newey, he said in Miami when he resigned from Red Bull that there was one feature of this car that he didn't like, and there's also been theories over the last couple of weeks that lots of Newey's ideas for this car were effectively rejected, and Pierre Wache and his team wanted to go in a different direction. And this is one of those moments of Red Bull. It would be really great, wouldn't it, to have genius aerodynamicist, the greatest of all time, working with your team. You could say, all right, Adrian, what should we do? But he's left, so unlucky, I guess. And it's also one of those situations where the spotlight will fall on Christian Horner, right? I mean, look, they're still probably going to win the drivers this year. They've still won championships for the last few years. But a downfall of this magnitude, if they can't arrest it quickly, has to fall at the feet of Horner on some level, right? So Marco talked about what he said. Verstappen says, it's true that I've said a lot, and it's now up to the team to come up with changes. And let's be real, if they cannot make those changes that he wants for next year, he will be on the phone to Toto Wolff. I'm pretty convinced about potentially joining that Mercedes team if Mercedes continue to move forward in the right direction, right? You know, they've won races this year, Mercedes. They've not got the fastest car. They're not far away. They're closer than Red Bull as it stands. As obviously as Max says, we saw this comment, I believe, yesterday. At the moment, both championships are not realistic. But as some people are suggesting for the McLaren side, maybe that's okay because they are dealing with Papaya Rules, whatever Papaya Rules potentially is. So let's talk about this McLaren situation because it's obviously partly on Norris. Norris should have executed better at multiple races this season. Hungary is an example, getting beaten off the line. Spain is an example. Even Imola, you could potentially argue, could have been better. Several opportunities this year where Lando himself has obviously not, driven as he might like to have done in hindsight. Of course, went on to win the Dutch Grand Prix, but his start still wasn't so good. So it's partly on Norris, and the thing is with me is Norris has so many attributes that can make him a world championship quality driver, but he's still clearly missing something, and maybe a couple of things, quite a few things, if he wants to really get to that level, right? Because, as I say, if Verstappen was in this McLaren, if Hamilton, if Leclerc was in this McLaren, you know, this championship would probably be over, or at least would be very close. Like, that points gap would probably be very close to being eliminated between those drivers and the current number one in the standings. With Lando, that's not been the case, but it's not all on Lando, right? And I think that's what we've got to understand as well. There's clearly some pressure internally at the team that confuses me as to why they are operating in this way. And it seems like they've finally come to their senses after this race, but it's arguably going to be too late, because when we look back on this season, as I see it, the most likely current outcome is that Max wins the championship by a pretty small margin. Could be 10 points, could be 15 points, but arguably over Hungary and this race, they've thrown away, 17 points for Lando, something in that ballpark that they could have had otherwise. And of course, Lando himself will feel like he could have made up many more than that simply on his own. The Piastri move was a spectacular move. We talked about it yesterday, and I've got no problem with drivers going for moves like that. I do think that from the McLaren perspective, there should have been a conversation that said, look guys, if you're 1-2 through the Curva Grande with no pressure from behind, let's just keep it clean, hold position, and ensure we have the 1-2 at the end of the first lap. Because they fought going into the Roger chicane, and Piastri, made a phenomenal move, but obviously sent Lando way offline, and Leclerc got the position and eventually was in position to win the entire race as a result. So that's when this whole Papaya Rules comes into play. And understandably, there's been lots of talk about this, because when Red Bull were dominating, and it was the Vettel-Webber era, and we'll get onto the Vettel-Webber era in a second, because Webber, let's not forget, is Oscar Piastri's manager, mentor, probably wrote some of the clauses into the contract. There might be, I almost think there definitely is, some part to play that has had in terms of why we are currently seeing what we are seeing at McLaren. You may disagree, but I thought it's interesting. And then, of course, when Mercedes were dominating, it was, look, Valtteri, we need you to support Hamilton here, abort the fastest lap attempt, which he did, but still got it. And then Hamilton got it eventually anyway, back at the Dutch Grand Prix in 2021. But for McLaren, it's like, what are Papaya Rules? What does this mean? And are they following the rules? Are they not following the rules? I mean, as we saw here from Zach Brown, an interesting facial expression. He says, Papaya Rules basically just is don't crash, right? Don't crash. But there should be more to it than that. And even what I thought was very interesting is after the race, McLaren are now going to investigate whether this lap one move from Oscar on Lando broke the Papaya Rules. I mean, what reality are we living in here? We will review with the drivers, look at the videos, and then we will assess together whether they were compliant. It's like, I don't know. I know some people don't like team orders, and I get it, but team orders are allowed. And if you're a team trying to be competent and trying to win, you don't say, oh, well, just race, try not to crash, guys, and then we'll review after the race whether you've broken our rules or not together. Like, no, you take a start and you say, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, we pay you to drive for us, you're going to drive as we tell you to drive. And the thing that's frustrating many fans is that McLaren have an opportunity this year to win both championships. It's a real opportunity. And these opportunities don't just come along every year, right? It's been 16 years since McLaren have won a driver's title in 2008. It's been more than that since they won a constructor's title. And we've seen it with other teams. They've not even been a contender in a championship for well over a decade. And here they are, having the possibility to do it and arguably throwing it away. That's the frustrating thing to many. It's like, they might not get this chance next year. Maybe Red Bull get back in business, right? Maybe Mercedes become the strongest team. Maybe Ferrari really put it together with Hamilton at the team, whatever. Right, McLaren might not have the chance next year to win the driver's title. And in 2026, who knows? Brand new set of regulations. Anything is possible at that point. So this is the year, you've got to capitalize when the opportunity is there. And this is what Toto is saying. I mean, Toto is from the Mercedes angle, but he says it's always difficult because as a team you want to allow them to race, but equally, as he says, the rational side needs to prevail. At the end of the day, you don't want to lose out on a championship by 3 or 5 points that you could have easily made. So walking that tightrope is so difficult, there's no universal truth how to handle it, but he says, Andrea understands the sport, the team principle at McLaren, of course. He has that racer's soul that doesn't want to do it, doesn't want to employ the team orders. He wants to let them race, but I think they are going to come to the conclusion after this race, how are we handling this? Is this for the best? And, the racing intent and all this type of stuff. And according to the team, that's maybe now what they have done. This, I thought, was a fascinating couple of statements after the Grand Prix. They were asked the question, right, like, should McLaren back Lando? Because at the end of the day, that race yesterday, even the final few laps when it was quite clear that Oscar was not going to be able to chase down Leclerc for the victory, they could very well have asked the drivers on the final lap to swap positions and at least, damage limitation, get Lando the second place. Because in Hungary, I still disagreed. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I told you guys at the time, I think Lando should have just defied what the team said and just held on for the victory because he was the one in the best position in the championship and it was quite clear that there was a championship battle at that point. But I get what the team did there to some degree, although yet again, McLaren managed to have an unbelievable weekend in Hungary and still come out looking like the losers somehow. And they've done, in some respects, the same thing here. And obviously, it's difficult for the drivers to comment on this if there hasn't been a clear line behind the scenes. But Norris is like, it's not up to me, do we want to play it fairly? The time is running out, he says, basically. The time is going away. It's not for me to decide. So clearly the team hasn't decided. And Piastri's like, no comment. So does the Mark Webber angle have something to play here? Because Webber experienced what it was like to be alongside Vettel in that Red Bull environment, where as good as Webber was, they quite clearly had that 1-2 situation. Even the multi-21 that Vettel then ignored, like that caused lots of drama. And maybe Webber's written into the contract of Piastri that he's got to be considered a number one driver at the same status as Lando. But at the end of the day, you're a team. You want the best for the team, and the team is probably going to win the constructors. So, at least in Hungary, Oscar was going for the win. So I get it on some level. Whereas here, Oscar was getting second, Lando was getting third. That's a simple 3-point swing that you could have made at the drop of a hat. And how much is Piastri going to care that he was second or third? I mean, who really cares, right? They could have done that, McLaren. They decided not to, and that point gap might be critical. I mean, at the end of the season, it's very plausible that Max wins this championship by like 6 points. And at that point, McLaren will only have themselves to blame for not winning this championship with Lando Norris, right? Because Stella finally seems to get it. And maybe the team has finally got it, because they say today, we are fighting Max Verstappen. So I think if we want to give support to one driver, we definitely have to pick the one that's in the best position. So, he hasn't said outright, okay, Lando's the number one, Piastri's going to support him from now on. But he's basically said that they've at least had that conversation. And probably that's what they're going to have to do. I mean, let's be a serious team, McLaren, for once. I mean, I just don't understand how they have such a good car and they're managing to squander what should be an easy, at least comeback in the Drivers' Championship. Like, it was always going to be difficult to win, but it should be closer than it is, there's no doubt. And it seems like now they might have finally come to that realization that if they are going to support a one driver, then obviously it's going to be Lando, isn't it? Because he is ahead in the championship, and also he deserves to be ahead. I mean, at the end of the day, this is the performance between Piastri and Norris this season. These are their points this year. In terms of qualifying, it's 14-2. I mean, Lando's dominated Piastri in qualifying. Obviously, Lando needs to improve his starts. 10-5 in podiums, 2-1 in terms of wins. In terms of like overall performance in the races, Piastri's been a bit better, but nonetheless, it's kind of similar. Like, it's obvious. I mean, pole positions, Norris has had 4, Piastri's had 0, right? Like, it's as good as Piastri, I think, is. Norris has clearly outperformed him this year and deserves, I would say, that number one status. And they might give him it now, but it might be too late because the championship lead is still substantial. And while Norris will eat into it, I'm sure, it might come up a little bit short and McLaren may rue their decisions that they made right about now. In the constructors, fine, but at the end of the day, only the teams really care about the constructors. The fans care about the drivers. And I want to have an interesting fight. I think we do have an interesting drivers fight, but probably only if McLaren get their act together right about now. So it's a very interesting situation, but McLaren and Lando Norris both need to start operating like World Championship winners if they want to win this World Championship. So very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.